Schedule type number 1, basic information. The arrow represents an activity. The length or direction of the arrow does not have any meaning. However, as a general rule, set up a critical path method, or a CPM, in a linear fashion from left to right. The dummy arrow, the dotted arrow, represents an activity with 0 days of duration. The circle is called an event. It is simply a point in time, or beginning or ending point of an activity. Take a look at these diagrams. Notice the circles are the events, and in between the events there is an arrow which represents some activity in the construction project. It could be digging footers, it could be hanging drywall, painting, or some other activity of a construction project. Notice there is a time frame that is related to that particular activity. In the top diagram, you will see that 6 days have been allotted for that particular activity. Down at the bottom, you will see a dummy arrow, a dotted arrow connecting events A and B, and that is a 0 time frame. A dummy arrow always represents a 0 time frame, and they're used basically to tie different parts of a construction project together. Related to each circle or event on a CPM, you might see something that looks like a T, as in this example. On the left side of that T, you would find a number representing the early start date. On the right side, you would see a number representing the late start date. The early start date represents the earliest date an activity can start. The late start is the latest day within the CPM that an activity can start and not affect the completion date. Typically in a schedule, it's represented as shown here. The difference between the early start and the late start is known as float time. From the example above, 19 days for the late start date minus the 8 days for the early start date gives us a difference of 11 days, which is called the float time. Here's an example of a basic CPM diagram with the time duration in days. Notice on each arrow there is a number representing the number of days allotted for that particular activity. The forward pass. Number 1. The forward pass calculates the early start dates. The beginning of the schedule, which is the first early start, always starts at 0 days. It is represented on the left side of the T. Number 2. Add the duration of the following activity to the previous early start to get the early start for the next activity. So if you look at event A, the beginning of the project, 0 is written as the early start date. To that, you will add the number of days allotted for that next activity, activity AB. 2 days have been allotted. 0 plus 2, we would add up, and so we would put 2 as the early start date at event B. Then we're going to take the 2 at event B and add the 6-day activity, BG, to that. 2 plus 6 equals 8. And that will be our early start date for event G. Forward pass continued. Number 3. If there are 2 or more activities ending at the same event, the larger of all calculations would be entered as the early start for the next activity. In this case, if we look at activity BG, we're going to take what was written on the T to the left side. The early start date at event B is 2. We're going to add 6 to that, and we get 8. But notice there is another arrow also coming into G. We see CG. At C, the early start date is 3, and if we add the 2 for that next activity, CG, we get 5. We always choose the larger because both activities have to be complete before you can move on. Number 4, the last early start date will represent the total number of days needed to complete the job in the CPM schedule. This diagram shows a completed forward pass. Take a look at how the numbers are put in for each early start date through the project. Over on the far right, notice that we have 28 as our early start date. That's the completion of the project. This will be a 28-day project.